After a long hiatus due to a benzodiazepine addiction, Jordan Peterson is back. He has a new contract. He's working for a company that basically does a little more than advertise for the Republican Party. So he finally sold out to one half of the two-party cartel, and he wants to talk about the big topics, such as the Ukraine war and the interactions between the three superpowers. Is he really qualified to talk about that? What's his qualification? Well, he wears a really nice suit, he wears a really nice watch, he puts on this very stern look on his face whenever he's in front of a camera, and he's got a PhD, doesn't he? Well, problem is, he originally studied a bit of political science, and then he got into clinical psychology. He sort of specialized on addiction for a while, and then he kind of went into 20 different directions. And then, of course, he joined the new right trend phase, the fad, and created this sort of cult following around him. Now, in order to talk about the Ukraine war now in a meaningful way, you needed to be laser focused on the superpowers, on their true intelligence capabilities for the last 10 years. You need to be hyper specialized on these things. And if you haven't been laser focused on these things, you are not competent to speak about the Ukraine war. Now, it's painfully obvious that Jordan Peterson just picks up stuff oftentimes in a very superficial manner. And then he regurgitates that stuff to his audience, and he puts on this very stern face, and he talks in a very dramatic fashion. But you immediately sense his tremendous lack of historical knowledge and historical understanding. Most of what he says is old stuff. It's very banal. It's very commonplace talking points. So Jordan Peterson now has a contract with the platform Daily Wire, which was jump-started by the oil billionaires Dan and Ferris Wilks, who also paid for one of the most disgusting Republicans, Ted Cruz. Now, this guy is so terrible and so toxic that even Republican politicians hate the guy. If you're a professional politician, I mean, you experience a lot of toxic people, but to them, Ted Cruz really takes the cake. So Peterson or his colleague Ben Shapiro or all these other people, Crowder and Joe Rogan and all these people, they get so much attention, and they could use this attention to damage the two-party cartel. They could use their power to establish independent new political candidates and new political parties, and just to rock the boat. But that's not what they're doing. They get money for advertising for the Republican Party. That's all they're doing. So you could actually book an actor for $25 an hour and put him in front of a camera. Let this actor read from the teleprompter, and you would have the same thing that you get from Jordan Peterson. Now, the Republican Party, as one half of the two-party cartel, they do not have a single position on the Ukraine war. So some of the older, more powerful Republicans, they're in these defense committees and intelligence committees and very close to the Pentagon. And these Republicans, they're battling Russia any place they can, any way they can. Intelligence operations, financial warfare, the cyber realm, information warfare. That's all they do. That's what they do all day. It's just the same as in the Cold War. I mean, remember the current Russian leadership. The current Russian leadership is KGB. And we do not even know which individual from the KGB actually has more power than somebody else from the KGB over there. The true leadership structure in Russia is secret. Everybody's supposed to look at Vladimir Putin, who was just kind of a C plus or maybe a D plus player in the KGB. Just a few years of operational work in communist East Germany. So on the one hand, you have these more powerful Republicans, and they're battling Russia. And this is not about ideology, because every imperialism is more or less the same. And the KGB in Russia today, they have abandoned traditional Marxism-Leninism, which was just a cover for overtaxation and overregulation to begin with. And this is what every empire does. Overtaxation and overregulation. And then you have other Republicans, and you have people like Tucker Carlson at Fox News, and they sort of play a different role. What they're saying to the audience is that Russia is now conservative. It's a supposedly very Christian country. It's an ally, and we need this ally against the left in the US and internationally. And then Russia would be an ally against the communist Chinese. This is a very simplistic narrative, right? It's very ideological. It's what people in the audience want to hear. So this narrative is, why should we care about Ukrainians? What is Ukraine to us? It's nothing. We should hand it over to the Russians. This would be a nice way to push back communism and that sort of thing. And what Jordan Peterson is now saying is exactly that. What we've heard from Fox News and some of the Republicans. So there's this recent video. I think it's the official channel on YouTube, Jordan B. Peterson. The title of the video is Russia versus Ukraine, or Civil War in the West. Now, at the beginning, he says, okay, the war in Ukraine is pretty grim. You know, this is like his little disclaimer. So whenever somebody criticizes him, he could just deflect the criticism. That's kind of what many people are doing. And he tends to blame two people in Russia, Vladimir Putin and the current head of the Russian Orthodox Church, who is also a KGB guy. And so, by blaming these two Russian guys, Jordan Peterson leaves open this naive expectation, the naive hope of a future after Putin and after the current Orthodox Christian patriarch. So they are responsible for the war. We are supposed to think, and in a few years, these two guys will be gone. Putin will be gone, the patriarch will be gone, and then you have a sort of a restart in Russia and a reboot of international relations. So let's all forget this great disappointment of the Ukraine war, and let's just keep this hope alive, this irrational expectation alive that Russia is a Christian conservative ally to save us from Marxism. And this is a very dangerous idea that Putin is responsible for the war and you can all blame it on him and he's sick anyway and he's going to be gone. The true KGB power structure in Russia today, they've put Putin in the center of attention. And of course, they can remove Putin at any time for health reasons or whatever and make it look like a restart. Make it look like a reset. Blame the war on Putin and then resume international trade. So, the Russian system, the Russian regime is completely rotten and completely psychopathic. It's just what it is. It doesn't matter how many people are officially listed in Russia as members of the church. It doesn't matter that new churches are being built. It doesn't change anything. So, for years and years and years, conservatives in the West advertised for the Russian regime, and they did all this activism, created this hope, something that people wanted to hear, something that people were willing to pay money for. And they click on things and they share things. And then the Ukraine war happened, and many conservative activists pretended that this would never happen, or they were dead certain this would never happen. And then it happened. So massive disappointment, years of activism have evaporated in an instant. And instead of admitting that this was all a big mistake, part of the Republican apparatus is now just doubling down on this stuff, and they blame everybody else for this war. So somehow politicians had made some wrong choices, and spread of communism, and Russia had no choice but to invade and all this nonsense. And it's not just the Republicans who hope that the war is over soon and we can all go back to whatever activism we've done before. It's also the Democrats hoping that the war will be over soon. It's the left in Europe that has had deep ties to the Russian regime. And even these leftists, they want this war to be over soon, resume trade, resume the gas trade. So this policy advocated by Jordan Peterson is not a conservative policy. It's something that the left also employs, and the left also does. And remember, during the Obama administration, President Obama was joking about the Russian threat. So when he was confronted with the idea that Russia is still an aggressive, expansionist empire, as it has been for more than 1,000 years, Obama poked fun at this and said, oh, gee, what the 1980s have called, they want their foreign policy back. And oh, by the way, Republicans want social policy from the 1950s back, and fiscal policy from the 1920s. Haha. So this was supposed to be the reset or restart of these American relations with Russia. So this was the Obama admin from 2008 to 2016. The left, or the left part of the two-party cartel, they helped Russia trade, appeasement, anything you can think of. And even during the Bush admin, I mean, you saw the war on terrorism, all this money being wasted, trillions of dollars being wasted, basically stolen from the population and handed over to defense contractors and other contractors, blowing trillions of dollars on these wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And then, of course, chaos breaks out in Iraq and the Taliban take back Afghanistan. The Patriot Act, the torture, the uranium ammunition, all these scandals during the Bush admin. And Russia also benefited from the 9/11 attacks because Vladimir Putin essentially copied the Bush administration's policies. So the Russians had their war in Chechnya. And Russia even had its own bin Laden type villain. Or it had several of them. Shamil Basayev, for example. And this guy wore a camo jacket in these propaganda videos and having a AK rifle in the background, just like bin Laden. And so Russia greatly benefited from 9/11, and Russia also helped the Bush admin let the American military use certain bases and territories in the former Soviet sphere of influence. And all this horrible stuff during the Bush administration, all this horrible stuff was bad enough by itself, but it also did even more damage, namely political damage. It scared away so many people, especially young people and women, and drove them into the hands of socialists. Right? But this is the Republican Party, which Jordan Peterson is now advertising for, with Daily Wire and Ben Shapiro and all these people. So Peterson, not really specialized on these topics, not really an expert the way he thinks he is, but he is collaborating with some experts. But the problem is that these experts he is talking to, they're very, very close to the Republican apparatus and basically to the Anglo ruling class, the empire. And if you truly want to understand the Ukraine war and the superpowers, you can't be biased. You can't be part of one of these systems, because then you automatically start to obfuscate and you would never go against your own community. Peterson quotes a guy called Frederick Kagan, went to Yale University and married to a woman from a powerful think tank paid for by the defense contractors such as DynCorp and Raytheon. Kagan's brother is married to Victoria Nuland, who was kind of a hardline diplomat type, especially when it came to Ukraine. Kagan's father was a professor at Yale, maybe a member of Skull and Bones or Scroll and Key. He was also a member of the Hudson Institute, very powerful think tank. So if you go to this guy, you get the talking points of the US ruling class. Then Peterson talks about Dr. John Mearsheimer, member of the Council on Foreign Relations, former Air Force officer, and member of the Brookings think tank. And Mearsheimer doesn't have a single original new idea. He just keeps talking about that NATO went too far with its Eastern European expansion. But as we can clearly see, in 1997, there was an agreement between the United States, official agreement between the United States and Russia. Not some talk during the end of the Cold War, with Mr. Baker, telling the Russians NATO is not going to expand. That was the conventional wisdom at the time, and that was not an agreement. It doesn't count. It's meaningless. So stop quoting it, you fools. In 1997, there was an official agreement, whereas former Soviet countries in Eastern Europe were former Soviet countries in Eastern Europe were giving the right to choose their own membership in these defense alliances. So that means Poland, even Ukraine, as sovereign countries, they had the right to join NATO. Russia was okay with that, but there was one major condition. These new NATO members were not allowed to build up significant troops. And so what was this NATO expansion for? It was not true NATO expansion. It was basically just a way to placate the taxpayers in Western Europe to pay for these Eastern Europe countries to fix the roads and fix industry and fix all these things that were ruined under communism. That's what this NATO Eastern Europe expansion was about. It was just a smokescreen to make people, to calm people down, right? And what Jordan Peterson is saying in this new video is what you can get out of many different newspapers. It's what everybody's has been saying so far. These banalities. And Peterson frames the Ukraine war as a left versus right battle. So you're supposed to vote Republicans and you're supposed to do activism for Russia, and then anything will be fine, and the victory against the left is supposedly close. So this is propaganda on the level you would expect from the 8th grade in school. But if Peterson wears a nice suit and he just puts on a stern face and he's acting in front of the camera, that's enough to fool many people. He says we shouldn't care about Ukraine. Russia needs it to feel safe and all that. This is exactly what the left said during the Cold War, during Soviet communism. It's the exact same thing. Oh, leave Russia alone, and why should we care about Poland? Why should we care about Ukraine? The Russians need that to feel safe. It's exactly what the communists said back in the day. Peterson talks about a revival of the church in Russia, which is ultimately meaningless because it's a pretty psychopathic regime. And many people are listed as members of the church, but that doesn't mean they're practicing Christians. Doesn't mean they don't beat up their wives and their children and drink too much vodka. Putin is supposedly a practicing Christian, but there's no real evidence of that. We just don't know what he does in his private life, and there will be an era after Putin. And so no matter how deep Putin's supposed Christianity goes, there's going to be a time after Putin in which many, many Russians are, Christian. And so that's why Russia is our ally. This is the line of reasoning Jordan Peterson is offering here. It's exactly the kind of naive lie the audience wants to hear. It's what the audience wants to pay for. This is hope porn. Next, Peterson says that Putin always rails against the Western degeneracy. Now, it's some pretty rich talk because Russia is a disaster. The whole society is wrecked, and few people actually want to have children. The demographic situation in Russia is horrible, and the ruling class in Russia is so corrupt, and they pay for little girls from the countryside and boys from the countryside, and many kids, they actually sell themselves to the upper class because that's the only way to rise up in society. And so then Peterson talks about the extremist Alexander Dugin. Now, you probably heard of Alexander Dugin. He bills himself as an Orthodox Christian, but he has been an occultist, a hardcore occultist for a very long time. Dugin has never actually presented any new ideas, any new thoughts, right? It's just a lot of theater that you get with Dugin, the beard and the facial expression and all that stuff. But Peterson calls this guy a genuine philosopher. So, I mean, is the American spirit not the Constitution and the Bill of Rights? The revolution that was fought against the British king. But the Russian system now more and more resembles the old Tsarist empire. And the Tsars were one of the same family as the British throne. So how does that fit together? Are people now for the revolution and enlightenment, winning against the British king? Or are they now for the Russian system today, where these KGB guys, they live like the Tsars and they rule like the Tsars? So which one is it? Which one do you want? So not only is Dugin an extremist, Dugin is also an occultist, and as of late, Dugin is advocating an alliance between Russia and communist China. But you don't hear that from Jordan Peterson because he either doesn't know that or he doesn't say it because that would ruin the whole point he's trying to sell to this audience. So apparently it's enough to be old and have a beard and wear a suit and just whine about the left. And that makes you a genuine philosopher. Right, next, Putin supposedly fears Western socialism because for about 100 years, this evil socialism had taken hold of in Russia, and then socialism was over in Russia. And so there might be a resurgence of communism, and it scares Putin, and that's why he's such an autocrat, and that's supposedly why he invaded Ukraine, to save Ukrainians from gays and trans people and that sort of thing. Framing the Ukraine war, which is very basic imperialism. Framing this as a way to push back global communism, that sounds like a Nazi narrative, right? That's kind of something what the Nazis always said, that they had to do this and they had to do that to fight back communism. And next, Jordan Peterson tries to be a philosopher himself. He starts whining against black Supreme Court justice. He starts whining about all those sex topics, the gays and trans people and all that. So what does what does that have to do with the Ukraine war? It's almost as if Jordan Peterson is trying to sell the Ukraine war, which is a disaster, is trying to sell it as a success, a win against the left. At the end of the video, Jordan Peterson is threatening all these horrendous consequences if the help for the Ukrainians continues. So everything's going to escalate in world war and nuclear war, and the world is going to fall apart if we continue to help Ukrainians. But what's his solution? Does he even have anything resembling a solution? He just wants to hand Ukraine over to Russia. What if Russia has coordinated this attack with the Chinese years in advance? What then? Would it be smart to hand Ukraine over to the Russians? So then the United States has to face Russia and China? Not smart. So about the 43-minute mark of the video, Jordan Peterson says this: we cannot do without the Russians on our side. So here's where he says, we're going to lose against the Marxists, everything's going to go to hell if we don't join with the Russians. So Peterson is like a drug dealer, and he's selling the drug in form of this irrational hope that we're going to win against the Marxists with this kind of policy. Peterson is threatening his audience with literal hell, and he sounds like a disgusting televangelist guy who's just scamming his followers. So he doesn't have any solution to offer. He doesn't offer anything. He's just directly or indirectly telling people, vote Republican, go to your church, and do Russian propaganda and hope for the best. That's all he has to offer. And he gets paid for that. Then he claims that Western politicians haven't been speaking to Putin properly for ideological reasons. They're not close enough to Putin. They're not in his face, breathing the same air. Well, Putin is keeping his distance. He has a tremor. Maybe Parkinson's, maybe cancer, maybe something else. Maybe he's being poisoned by his own people. And Putin keeps his distance, maybe because of chemotherapy, maybe because his immune system is compromised. He does not want to catch any germs from anybody. That's why he doesn't breathe the same air than other people. I mean, Putin is keeping his distance from his own people. And what if we don't just have a secret alliance between the Russians and the Chinese? What if it's a cartel of all three superpowers? Because they have the most to gain from a secret cartel. You know, it makes no sense to truly fight each other. By maintaining this cartel, they can maintain their power status. They can keep any other country from rising up. And this cartel would also dominate the ideological sphere. So they have full spectrum dominance. And no matter what standard ideology you pick, you lose as a citizen. So you would lose. Peterson can buy his next house or his next nice suit and his next expensive watch. And this goes on and on and on. So in 10 years, maybe 20 years, Peterson is out of the game, and there will be a new guy getting paid to say the same things. And the same on the left. You already have influencers on the left that are basically like Jordan Peterson. They may look differently. Maybe they use a sense of humor, or they're not so stern looking, but it's virtually the same thing. You have leftist influencers telling people to vote Democrat and to be pro-China, because supposedly you need China as an ally to win against the right wing. That's how this thing works.